Thank you everyone for attending this Lunch and Learn. We've been doing a bi-weekly series and we're looking forward to keep this going. But this week's topic is about 7 things that basically every Agile executive should know. For those of you who are looking to be an executive one day, you'll want to have this stuff in your back pocket. And for those of you who already are on the executive team, you should know these things. And if not, well, we're going to cover them today. Feel free to turn your cameras on. I am recording, but I'm not recording you. I'm basically recording me and I'm recording the presentation, but just love to see your faces. If you don't mind turning your cameras on, you don't have to. But there are times where I may pause and ask a question and just see who raises their hand, and the digital hand raising tool just isn't as fun. So anyway, let's move along here. So basically, who am I? So my name is Robb Pieper. I head up a company called Responsive Advisors based in Chicago, Illinois. We are an agile management consulting firm that does primarily consulting work, coaching, training around building agile businesses. And specifically, we're a group of professional Scrum trainers licensed through scrum.org. So I've been doing this a little while. I've been a trainer doing scrum.org curriculum for about 8 years. I've been in the tech space since about 2003 in one way or another. I'm a recovering developer. Any former developers in the room? No? Okay. I'm also a co-host of the People Side of Software in Chicago, Illinois. And yeah, I've been a big fan of metalcore, and Lamb of God is sort of one of my favorites for a number of years. And as you can see behind me, I have sort of a music studio for an office. So music's a big part of my life as well. And with the COVID thing and getting to see everyone's home life, it's been rather interesting to see some of the hobbies that people have. Find a lot of people with guitars in their backgrounds. Or what do we have here? Trucks. That's an interesting virtual background. All right. So there are 7 things that we're going to be focused on today, revolving around things that basically Agile executives should know. We're going to talk about business strategy in a complex domain. We're going to talk a little bit about finance and a little bit about accounting and how those kind of go together in terms of building organizations that are more agile. We're going to talk about people management. We're going to also talk about change management and contracting. And then finally, we're going to wrap this up with vendor management. Let's dig into the complex stuff. So anyone here working currently at a McDonald's? No? Okay, good. We're in the right space here. That's a pretty simple problem, making hamburgers. Most of us are working in environments where we're building hard stuff. We're building things that have never really been done before. So you might run your business a little bit differently being in that environment than you would, say, a hamburger restaurant. And that leads me into this slide here. So we've got some types of work that are just very simple types of work. Hamburger making, for example. You know exactly what you're going to be eating when you go and order a double quarter pounder with cheese, add the bacon, hold the mustard when you go to a McDonald's. We're very close to agreement on the y-axis here about what that's going to look like. And we're close to certainty about the specifications and how to make a hamburger. There's no question as to what we're getting here. Now move a little bit further out and we have, I don't know, a few more unknowns. There are some things we don't know about certain problems. Like if I say, make me a delicious sandwich, there's a lot of things that you don't know at this point. Well, health concerns. What does delicious really mean to this individual? Do they like spicy mustard or not? And so we're going to try to work those requirements out, and we may have to experiment a little, but generally making a sandwich isn't all that challenging. Now, when you move into the complex domain, we are very far from certainty about requirements, very far from agreement as to what we're going to build. And in a lot of cases, when you're building software, this is the space you live in. If somebody says, make me a fancy website with an API and a mobile app, that could mean a lot of things to a lot of different people. I mean, generically, yeah, these things are things we've seen before, but do they solve your problems? I'm going to pick on, I think, a rental car company, Hertz. I think they recently went bankrupt, right? But back up a little bit, I believe it was them that was suing Accenture for not building this mobile app and a bunch of software that they had expected to build. So the specification was there. It was all in the contract, yet they got nothing of what they wanted. Now, I'm not picking on who did what and who should win this lawsuit, but there was very clearly some missed expectations regarding what was getting built. So in the software space, we are typically in the complex space. If you're in marketing, you're in the complex space. If you are in hardware product development, you're in the complex space. And auto manufacturers are, at one point, they thought what they did was just complicated, and now it's becoming more complex because consumer preferences have changed to electric cars. It might even shift more towards automated cars. And a lot of manufacturers were just building the same old thing every year with maybe a mile per gallon improvement in their fuel efficiency. But were they really delighting their customers with that one new bell and whistle on the 2019 model? Probably not. Tesla's doing over-the-air upgrades. You park your car in your garage and you get a Wi-Fi update with new features. Oh, hey, look, Mom, now I can drive my car and no hands. Hey, that's pretty cool. Ford doesn't do that. So they're kind of modeling hardware development now off of the way software has been built for a long time. Anarchy, I mean, that's like the chaotic space. This would be, I mean, imagine you worked in an emergency room. It's crazy, right? All of a sudden one day, 50 people come in, they have coronavirus. The next day it's pretty calm. I mean, how do you plan for that? You really don't. And so we're not gonna worry about that space because none of us work in emergency rooms. None of us are working in a war situation where the bombs are flying. So we're in this complex space. So basically I look at it like this. If you can identify clear cause and effect, I do this one thing, customers happy, I sell 1 million objects, you're probably in the simple space. Best practices can be established in this area. You can optimize processes, and sure, maybe command and control works. More or less how you run a McDonald's. You don't have to have a whole lot of thinking when it comes dinner rush. Everybody mans their station and follows the instructions how to make their food, and the place runs fairly smoothly. Complex, no clear cause and effect. I build software, 1 million users use it. I build another feature, 5 users use it. What's the difference here? Why do some users like that feature and others like the other? Who knows? Answers emerge. Things are changing over time, and things might be changing pretty fast for you. Continuous evolving. These are all characteristics of being in a complex environment. So what should you do if you are in one versus the other? If you find yourself in the complicated or simple space, you're running a McDonald's or you're doing something that's fairly repeatable, like mass producing the same objects over and over, you're probably going to hire specialists or maybe even trained specialists that are going to be really good at their particular jobs. And you're going to plug them in kind of like robots because what they do is more or less repeatable work, like a robot would be good at doing. You might even hire robots. Specialist managers. So managers are going to probably come up through the ranks from a specialist function, and they'll train other specialists below them, and they're going to work with these kinds of teams, and they're going to plug in to this system. So you can keep training fairly simple and repeatable. You already have best practices established, but your aim here is to focus on just getting the value out the door and reducing costs to do it in order to improve net income. On the right-hand side, we have the complex. Here, we're probably going to want to focus on hiring generalists because generalists can do lots of different things while might not be an expert in any one of them, can plug in a lot of ways. This improves flexibility. When you don't know when you don't have clear cause and effect established, we want maximum flexibility. Hire people-focused managers, because human beings are a complex organism, and especially in groups, we become even more complex and unpredictable. So you want to find people that are good with people when working in these kinds of environments. We'll talk a little bit more on that when we get to the management section here. We're going to optimize for learning. We are going to want to build an organization that's constantly getting better and constantly evolving around their products, around what it is that they're trying to deliver for their customers. And get back to this one here, bullet point number 4, focusing on those customers' changing needs. So we're going to have to be really close to value and close to our customers in these sorts of environments in order to be successful. So let's talk a little bit about finance and accounting. So what is it that these people do? Anybody here coming up out of finance? Anyone? All right, well, let me briefly go over this. So you've got these people, they're doing a job. It's kind of mysterious to some of us. And what they do in those back rooms sometimes leads to waterfall development. And let me explain. So bookkeeping, I mean, they're dealing with all kinds of records on a daily basis, how much we're spending, how much we're earning, and they're putting this all together so that reports can be built. They're dealing with accounts payable, they're dealing with accounts receivable, and these individuals may be dealing directly with your vendors. They may be getting out in front of some of the contracts that are getting built so that when you are working with a particular vendor, these contracts are already established, and we're going to get to the contracting thing later. But financial reporting and controls. So one thing that they're going to be interested in is building up financial reports and understanding where net income is coming from. Now, at the end of the day, net income is how much money the business gets after they've paid their taxes, after they've paid for all the operational fixed and variable expenses. Now, one thing they're going to be concerned with, especially when building software or building new products that derive value over a long period of time, is when you build that stuff, can you write off the labor this year, lowering your tax bill, or do you have to put it onto your balance sheet like an asset, like a building that you purchased, and depreciate it over time? Now, if you don't know the difference, the main idea here is we want to lower our tax bill this year. That's a pretty big focus for most companies. But the IRS is like, whoa, 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 hold on, guys. You can't just write off all the software in the year you produced it. If you're going to get value out of this for a long period of time, you have to follow a depreciation schedule, like buying a building or buying a piece of heavy equipment for manufacturing. So that sometimes leads to interesting problems with software development teams at a larger scale, because they have to do a lot of reporting and paperwork. You know, did I write software today? Did I do bug fixing? Did I just do some analysis or design work? All of those get categorized differently according to generally accepted accounting practices. And so your accounting people are going to be very interested in some of those things. And there are lighter weight ways to do it. We're not going to dig into it. Just know that that's something out there that you may run into. So financial planning, these individuals are going to be looking at forecasting sales and expenses. And they're, a part of what they're trying to do is understand how much we're going to be spending over some period of time so they can forecast profits. So they can help the CEO understand what decisions need to be made to ensure that the company remains profitable over time. So they're going to need really good data. And a lot of times they don't have really good data. So what they're doing is they're trying to figure out a lot of stuff in annual budgeting, like in October. How much are we going to spend next year on all these software products? And they put that into a model. But now you're committed to those numbers. So when you are finding yourself going through annual budgeting and you are committing to some crazy dates and you're coming up with these numbers that seem unrealistic, what we're really trying to do is understand how we're going to be spending money over time. And there's just not a better way to do it in most companies. Treasury, working capital. So working or making sure that you have cash is very, very important for business, especially with this whole coronavirus thing. Who knows what's going to happen in the next couple of months? And so a lot of businesses are very scared to make investments. They're nervous about losing any sort of cash they may need to float payroll for a while in case sales drop. And in some cases, a lot of companies did see their sales drop. For example, my gym, they just sent me a little notice the other day saying, hey guys, you guys can come back to the gym in Chicago come Friday. And I'm like, woo! And then I looked at the fine print. Wait a minute, they're going to keep charging me starting next month, but they can only have 25% capacity, which is interesting because wait, where do the other 75% go that are still paying? So I got to wait in line for an hour or two before I can get into the gym. I don't know, but either way, their revenue dropped a lot the last 3 months because nobody could use a gym in Chicago. So back to this budgeting topic. So all of these things roll into, in some cases, why your company is doing some annual budgeting every October. We're trying to figure out everything we're going to do next year, put numbers on it, put dates on it, so we can have a general idea of how we're going to be spending the money. But this causes a lot of friction. So I discovered recently that there's such a thing called, now I guess some of my slides are going to be missing. There are such a thing called Agile finance teams. So, excuse me, some proactive CFOs are building Agile finance teams. Sounds pretty crazy, doesn't it? Because they're not necessarily using Scrum, but the goal here is for them to be nimble, them to be responsive. And so they want to be more proactive, more strategic, and less tactical, and less just reacting to what's happening. And where that can plug in is, if they're proactive, they're going to be very interested in how your project is going, because they're going to be very interested in the burn rate and if you're going to hit certain milestones, so they can understand costs and the value that's associated with it. They're building integrated and cross-functional teams on the finance side, at least for these Agile finance teams. And they're looking at metrics that actually matter, not just how much did we spend, how much are we going to earn, but things like customer satisfaction, because that could impact the financial forecasts. They're going to look at maybe even employee satisfaction. If we don't have happy employees and they start leaving in droves, our costs are going to go up trying to replace and rehire. So there's a lot more variables than just dollars and cents that go into these Agile finance teams forecasts. They're developing new skills. They're trying to stay sharp. They're trying to evolve. They're trying to grow. so that they can remain strategic and more proactive. And so just very interesting reading through some of the stuff about how this Agile idea is spreading to other departments and other industries. Let's talk about a little bit about people management. So what we have in a lot of organizations is you have this situation where management doesn't know what to do with themselves. They grew up in waterfall. They grew up in this world where what they did was judged based on how many tasks perhaps their team completed, or things that just don't make any more sense or don't make sense anymore in this Agile space. So the Agile Manager is really going to be focused on people and culture first. They're going to be like a servant leader. And if you're looking at some of these ahead of me, you might start to recognize a lot of these look like what we would expect from a Scrum Master. It's kind of interesting, isn't it? A servant leader. So the best managers out there are the ones that can influence without authority. And that's a hard skill to develop, because it's very easy to say, do this because I can fire you. And then they do it, you get the compliance, but you don't really get engagement from these individuals. If you can motivate them to do it because it's a darn good idea, and they're like, hey, yeah, that sounds reasonable to me, you're going to get them involved. You're going to get them finding problems before you find them for the team. And in a lot of organizations, the managers don't even direct the work anymore. So I did some reading on this, Spotify model thing that's kind of been taking over the world, which is already an outdated model if you look at how Spotify is working today. But the Spotify model creates sort of an org structure as well as these Scrummy-like teams where they have chapters and they have squads. And so what they've created is you've got functional alignment around your specialty. So if I'm a developer, I'm part of a chapter of other developers, and we have a manager that's sort of the grower and the carer and the feeder of this development capability. But then I get my work from my squad. And so they'll be more product aligned, they're going to be more value aligned in terms of where they're getting their work, even though they retain some functional alignment so that they can share best practices across disciplines. So let me skip along here. Let's talk a little bit about change management. Now, this is a topic that I run into in a lot of organizations I work with. I even see it in the classes that we teach. When you don't approach change management in a healthy way, change doesn't happen. And if you don't think of change management as some sort of a discipline, then there's an opportunity to learn a few things here. So first thing I wanted to show you was this model ADKAR. It comes from the ProSci Institute. You can Google that one. But they take this approach that change happens at the individual level first before you focus on an organization. And some companies look at change management as if it were just sort of like a Windows 95 upgrade. And what that basically means is, hey, if I just push a change down, everybody will just change and everything will be wonderful. People don't work that way. We don't just upgrade like computers or robots. So people really need to understand, why do they need to make a change? What is it that I'm doing today that isn't good enough? Or why are you proposing that we do things a different way? If they don't understand the why behind it, they'll often reject the change. Why would I want to even support the change? Like what's in it for me in this case? Do I earn more money? Do I have a better work life? Does my team feel happier? What's in it for me if I do this? And it's different for everyone. So for example, my company teaches a lot of Scrum classes. Why is Scrum useful to a developer? That's a different answer than why is Scrum useful to a product owner? Why is Scrum useful to a CEO or a CIO? You got to have different answers ready for all of them, because there's something different in it for everyone. How do I change? And this is where knowledge comes into play, and that's why I kind of bring up the classes we do. A lot of people come to our public classes, they want the change, they know why they need it, and now they're there to learn it. When I teach private classes, often they're forced to be in there by their managers. And so we've skipped part 1 and part 2. They don't know why they need to do this. They don't know what's in it for them, but now I'm supposed to give them the knowledge and they're supposed to just be successful with it. Doesn't usually work that way. Now, if you can't apply what you've learned when you get out of the classroom, when you've got that new knowledge, it will likely fail. So it's sort of use it or lose it, right? The last one, how do I not fall back into old behaviors? That's the reinforcement side of things. Your culture needs to reinforce some of these ideas for them to stick. And so if your organization is going through a big change and they're not addressing this on a people level, there's an opportunity to improve to get your transformation to stick a little bit better. All right, so adaptive change management. Let's go back to this complexity thing. Human beings are highly complex organisms, and when you put us into groups, we're even more complex. So it's really, really, really important to remember that complexity when trying to go for a change. So I would strongly suggest you think about creating smaller batches of change. What I mean by that is, let's say we're going to do a cubicle upgrade, right? We've got an old school organization. You've got the 6-foot-high cube walls. Nobody can hear or see anybody when you go to work. And we're going to move to open office space. Has anyone ever gone through that experience before? I guess digitally raise your hand if you can, but well, maybe you haven't. I've seen it. So there was a company I worked with a long time ago in New York, and they had just this old school environment, and they wanted to turn it all into open workspace. So what they did was, this was actually really smart. They started with one small area, just a little bit, and they tried it out. And then some people tried out this environment and they gave feedback. They learned from that first experiment of changing around the desks and what works, what doesn't. Maybe the way they set up the power outlets wasn't correct. What they also learned was people that were used to that privacy now are in open space, and it could be very disruptive. So when they did the next round of changes, they incorporated some of that feedback. They put a little bit more space between desks so they didn't have so much distractions between individuals, and with aims to improve customer happiness, or at least the employee happiness, and improve productivity. They also learned that they needed more private office spaces that were unreservable. So in the next wave, they put in a bunch of offices that you could just pop into and have an impromptu meeting, because they had a situation where people would book these meeting rooms out months or even years in advance. You could never find a meeting space whenever you had to have some sort of a communication session. So with adaptive change management, small batches. We want to balance some adaptability with efficiency here, but if there's any complexity, you need to be adaptive. And so even with the cubicle move, they were proving value quickly. They just got a few desks done. They improved one area, but then they use that information to feed it back into the cycle for the next stage of the change. Agile transformations are very similar. So if you're going to, throw $1 trillion at putting Scrum in your organization. By the way, if you've got $1 trillion to spend on it, please give me a call. I'll help you out. But let's say we're going to do that. Don't do it in one big bang. Start small. Start with a group. Start with maybe one team. Get it to work with that one team before you start rolling it out to the rest of the company, or you're going to see mass rejection. So if you roll it out to the first team and it doesn't work, we can try something else to improve that team before trying to clone it. Let's talk a little bit about contracting. So there's lots of different types of contracts. And why agile contracts? Because in a lot of cases, fixed scope, fixed time, fixed dates, or fixed budget contracts end up pushing you into a waterfall situation where you've got a date, you already know what you got to deliver, and now we're just going to use waterfall. You feel like there's no way to develop adaptively if the contract is fixed. And that actually hurts the relationship between suppliers and customers. So if your customers' needs are changing over time, or costs are changing, or there's just a lot of change, I recommend you think about adaptable contracts. So let's take a look at what some adaptable contracts might look like. So here we've got basically target cost, incremental delivery, and time and materials type contracts. All of them are adaptable, just in slightly different ways. So let's take a look at the first one here. Target cost. This is an arrangement between the supplier and the customer to agree on a final price. Now, the final price is going to be reasonable. It's going to include cost to produce. It's going to include some fees so we can account for supplier risk. But our goal here is to make sure that there's shared responsibility around keeping costs down. So if the supplier can keep costs down, that benefits both sides. If the supplier cannot keep costs down, this is going to negatively affect both sides. So what this can do is lead to a relationship where there's mutual interest and mutual investment in making sure that costs remain low, and it helps both sides of the party. Both sides of the relationship. Incremental delivery. This one might sound familiar, but you can arrange contracts this way. Imagine you were to take a large project and break it down into mini projects, small ones, maybe a month or less, and establish review points where every time a project is finished, we can look at it and we can maybe make a change. Do we want to add more to this thing? Do we want to keep going on the path we thought we were going to go on? Do we want to try to reduce costs? Do we want to try to ramp up? Or do we want to cancel the contract altogether? We establish these checkpoints in this kind of a contractual relationship where the most valuable stuff ends up getting done first, because the supplier wants to make sure that they're going to keep this relationship going. So they're just going to keep delivering value. And so we can take change into account in this relationship. So a lot of companies are doing this. Jeff, one of the consultants with Response Advisors, he was a product owner at a company that developed software using this model for contracting with their clients on a regular basis. They did no fixed bid work at all because it's just notoriously a bad thing for software. And the last one, you probably heard of this one, I mean, time and materials. If you really just have no idea, you can hire a group, we can pay them for their time, we can pay them for their materials. So it's pretty simple. With these kinds of contracts have existed for a long time. Ideally here, the supplier is going to keep costs low because we want to keep that relationship going with this particular customer to keep the time and material billing happening. So lawyers, in a lot of ways, bill this way, right? They're not going to do fixed bid. Oh yeah, I can win your case. It's going to cost $1.3 million. No, they're going to get a retainer and they're going to bill you by the hour. Yeah, time and materials is sort of their game. Let's talk a little bit about vendor management. So this is often a pain point with companies and just something that you can't help but to run into. So, okay, I'm missing a few slides. I made some updates and then I changed computers. So I'm just going to go from memory on this one. With vendor management, you find that the best ways to deal with your vendors is basically going to be start first by creating an Agile contract, because the vendors are going to work with you based on these contracts. Now, okay, hey Rob, well, what do we do if we don't have that luxury? Because a lot of times people don't. Some things I would try to do are get the communication between you and that vendor working a whole lot better. Talk to them more. If you're using Scrum, get them in your sprint reviews. Get them in your daily Scrums. Keep communication high so we can spot issues sooner. If you can, try to synchronize on deliverables at certain checkpoints such that their piece is ready to go to integrate with your piece if they're building something to complement yours. Another thing you can do is try to shrink the size of the projects that they're working on and get it to look more like incremental delivery, even if your contract doesn't spell it out that way, so that you have those touch points. Another thing I would just go into this as an assumption. If you hire a vendor to build you software, to build you hardware, build you something that's complex, expect that the contract you've established for fixed date, fixed scope, fixed price is wrong, and they're going to either be late, they're going to deliver you the wrong stuff, scope will have been negotiated and you won't have had an opportunity to discuss it. You're going to have all the same problems waterfall development always has. So just assume that's going to be a problem and get ahead of it. Start working with that particular vendor a little bit more closely and start encouraging this idea of Agile contracts, which means you're going to probably have to talk to accounting, the accounts payable and receivable groups. You're going to have to talk to your boss. You're going to have to talk to the executive team about the benefits of these sort of contracted relationships. It'll make it a lot easier to execute those in the future.